In many communities across the United States, homeowners associations, HOAs, play a crucial role in maintaining the aesthetic and functional integrity of residential areas. Established to uphold property values and ensure that neighborhoods are kept in order, these organizations often implement a set of rules and regulations that homeowners are expected to follow. The idea is to create a harmonious living environment where residents can enjoy their properties without disturbances or unsightly distractions. Typically, an HOA is composed of homeowners who are elected to serve on a board. This board is responsible for creating guidelines that dictate everything from lawn maintenance and paint colors to structural modifications. While these rules can foster a sense of community pride and consistency, they can also lead to conflicts, especially when nature intersects with man-made regulations. For those living in traditional suburban settings, HOA rules may seem straightforward. Keep your lawn mowed, your fence painted, and your vehicles parked in designated areas. However, for residents like myself who own ranches or larger properties with unique characteristics, compliance with such regulations can become complicated. My ranch, home to a small herd of bison, presents a prime example of this clash between natural behavior and regulatory expectations. The purpose of an HOA is well intended: to protect property values and ensure that every resident adheres to similar standards. However, it raises the question, what happens when those standards conflict with the realities of farming or ranching? In my case, the introduction of wildlife into the equation adds layers of complexity that typical homeowners may never encounter. Bison are not only majestic creatures, but also have their own set of behaviors and needs that cannot simply be curtailed to fit into an HOA's framework. Upon moving to this expansive property, I was initially drawn by the freedom it promised, a chance to embrace the wilderness while engaging in ranching. As I began building my life here, I was aware of the existence of the HOA, but had not anticipated that my bison would inadvertently challenge its rules. These animals roam freely across the pastureland, embodying the spirit of their wild ancestry. They do not conform to traditional notions of livestock fencing or landscaping. Instead, they thrive in open spaces where they can express their natural behaviors. This situation becomes particularly challenging when an HOA compliance officer arrives on site claiming that my bison do not adhere to community regulations. The irony was not lost on me. How could one expect wild animals steeped in instinctual behavior to follow human-imposed rules? It felt as if nature itself was being summoned to stand trial for failing to comply with man's expectations. As I reflect on this experience, it becomes clear that HOAs often operate under a one-size-fits-all mentality that does not account for the diverse lifestyles within their jurisdiction. The situation at my ranch highlights a growing concern among property owners. How do we navigate the intersection of personal freedom and collective governance? Ultimately, it raises questions about what it means to live harmoniously with nature while also adhering to the structures designed for community living. Nestled at the edge of a sprawling valley, my ranch encompasses over 50 acres of diverse terrain, blending open pastures and dense woodlands. The landscape is a canvas of natural beauty, with rolling hills that catch the morning sun and a serene creek that winds its way through the property. It's a place where wildlife thrives, and the air is filled with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the occasional distant roar of my bison. When I first purchased this property, I envisioned a sanctuary not just for myself, but also for the animals that would call it home. The bison, majestic and powerful, are more than just livestock. They symbolize a connection to the wild and an appreciation for the natural world. Their presence on the ranch is both a privilege and a responsibility, and I have spent countless hours learning about their habits, needs, and behaviors. Unlike conventional farm animals, bison require significant space to roam freely, graze, and socialize. They thrive in environments that mimic their natural habitat, which includes open fields and areas to seek shelter. As I settled into ranch life, I found joy in observing these remarkable creatures. Each day brought new experiences as I watched them interact with one another and their surroundings. Their strong herd dynamics fascinated me. They communicated through vocalizations and body language, forging bonds that were evident in their daily routines. Raising bison is not merely an agricultural endeavor. It is an immersion into a lifestyle that honors and respects the wild instincts these animals embody. However, this lifestyle came with its own set of challenges, particularly when it came to balancing the needs of my bison with the expectations of the HOA. While I appreciated the intention behind the association's regulations, preserving property values and community aesthetics, I often felt that my ranch's unique nature was overlooked. The HOA's focus on conformity clashed with my vision of a thriving ecosystem where bison could roam as they pleased. The ranch itself is a blend of traditional structures and modern amenities. I have invested time and effort into creating comfortable living quarters and functional facilities for both myself and my animals. There's a barn equipped for various tasks, from storing hay to providing shelter during inclement weather. Yet, no amount of careful planning could account for the unpredictable nature of bison behavior. As I navigated this new chapter in my life, I began to understand that owning a ranch is not just about managing land or livestock. It's about embracing a philosophy that prioritizes coexistence with nature. This perspective requires flexibility and an open mind, especially when faced with unique challenges like those presented by HOA regulations. The juxtaposition of my rural lifestyle against the backdrop of community governance highlighted a significant dilemma. How can one honor the intricacies of wildlife while adhering to man-made rules? The ranch became a microcosm for broader questions about identity, ownership, and responsibility in an increasingly regulated world. As my bison grazed peacefully in the fields, I couldn't help but reflect on how their existence was a testament to the beauty of nature, and how crucial it was to protect that beauty from encroaching regulations that often feel out of touch with the realities of rural life. One sunny afternoon, I was tending to the bison when I noticed an unfamiliar vehicle winding its way up the gravel drive toward my ranch. A surge of curiosity mixed with apprehension filled me as I watched the car approach. It was clearly marked with the emblem of the HOA, and I instinctively knew that this visit would not be a casual social call. The compliance officer, a middle-aged man with a clipboard in hand and a serious expression, stepped out and introduced himself. He was there to address some complaints regarding my animals. As we exchanged pleasantries, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to enter into a contentious discussion. The officer explained that he had received reports from neighbors claiming my bison were roaming beyond their designated area and were creating disturbances by straying onto their properties. It took every ounce of restraint not to chuckle at the absurdity of it all. After all, these are bison we are talking about, large, wild creatures that do not adhere to human-imposed boundaries. I showed him around the property, trying to highlight the careful measures I had taken to secure both my bison's habitat and the surrounding areas. The pastures were expansive, yet well-defined by natural barriers such as trees and shrubs. Plus, I had installed sturdy fencing to keep them contained while allowing them enough space for exercise and movement, a necessity for their well-being. Nevertheless, the compliance officer seemed absorbed in his notes rather than observing the realities of ranch life. As he walked alongside me, he pointed out various aspects of my ranch that he deemed non-compliant with HOA regulations. "Your pastures should be mowed more regularly. They look overgrown," he remarked, peering disapprovingly at stretches of grass where my bison grazed contentedly. I felt a mix of frustration and amusement. These animals thrived in a natural environment that often looked untamed compared to manicured lawns. Despite my attempts to explain why my bison needed room to roam and why their natural behaviors could not be stifled by regulations intended for suburban yards, it became clear that his understanding was rooted in a strict interpretation of community rules. He seemed unmoved by my passion for preserving the land's wild essence or my commitment to ensuring that my bison lived healthily. The conversation shifted when he mentioned potential consequences if the issues weren't resolved promptly, a warning that made my heart sink. The notion of fines or even threats of legal action loomed over me like storm clouds about to burst. My mind raced with thoughts. How could anyone expect these animals to fit into a mold created for conventional neighborhood living? After what felt like an eternity, our meeting concluded with his promise to file a report based on our discussion. He left behind a heavy weight of uncertainty, one that lingered much longer than his presence had in my fields. As I stood watching him drive away, I realized this encounter symbolized more than just an enforcement visit. It was a microcosm of the ongoing struggle between nature and human expectations. My heart yearned for solutions that would allow both community standards and wildlife coexistence without compromise. With renewed determination, I resolved to fight for my ranch, its inhabitants, and the ideals they represented amidst the rigid constraints of HOA governance. The meeting with the compliance officer left me with a cocktail of emotions, but as I reflected on his claims, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by their absurdity. The officer presented a list of supposed infractions that he asserted my ranch had committed against HOA regulations. Among the most alarming claims was that my bison were wandering beyond the property lines, endangering not just themselves but also infringing on my neighbors' yards and gardens. I listened as he described complaints from nearby residents who insisted the bison had strayed into their meticulously manicured lawns, trampling flower beds and leaving behind evidence of their presence. Evidence that, to my knowledge, consisted mainly of hoof prints in the dirt and patches of grazed grass. It sounded ridiculous to think that a creature like a bison could truly pose a danger to suburban landscapes designed for manicured aesthetics. After all, these animals were fundamentally wild. They thrived on open spaces, not within the confines of typical neighborhoods. The officer's insistence on strict interpretation of HOA rules felt increasingly detached from the realities of ranch living. He cited specific regulations prohibiting livestock from crossing property lines without acknowledging that they were inherently different from standard pets or domesticated animals, which could be kept to smaller, confined areas. As we walked through the pastures, he seemed fixated on ordinances rather than on understanding what it meant to raise bison in such an expansive environment. Next, the officer expressed concern about the appearance of my ranch. He pointed out that the tall grasses and wildflowers attracted various wildlife, other than my bison, which might cause issues for surrounding properties. His argument caught me off guard. I had never considered nature's diversity a liability. To me, it was part of the ranch's charm. The vibrant palette of colors made it picturesque, and the wildlife contributed to a balanced ecosystem. Then he raised another issue. The fencing is inadequate, he proclaimed with authority. I winced internally at his words. I had invested significant time and resources building sturdy enclosures designed to accommodate bison while respecting their need for open space. Yet here was this compliance officer deeming my well-intentioned efforts unsatisfactory based purely on what appeared to be his subjective assessment. As I attempted to clarify how my fencing was installed specifically to contain large animals like bison, while allowing them freedom to roam within their designated areas, he waved my concerns away, seeming more interested in ticking boxes than in comprehending my ranch's unique dynamics. "These are regulations," he reiterated brusquely, dismissing my explanations with a pragmatic coldness that made my frustration simmer. Worse still was his mention of potential penalties if adjustments weren't promptly made, fines that could strain not only my resources but also my commitment to ranching as a way of life. I felt an oppressive weight resting heavily upon my shoulders as it dawned on me. For each rule he waved in front of me, there were challenges to come that threatened the very essence of what I was trying to preserve. In that moment, I had a choice. Allow myself to be swept away by the tide of compliance or stand resolutely for my vision of coexistence with these magnificent creatures. As the discussion concluded and I saw him jotting down notes one last time, I understood that this was more than just paperwork. It represented an ongoing struggle between nature's wild spirit and man's quest for control. With determination bolstering my resolve, I knew I would work tirelessly to preserve not just my place in this community, but also the dignity and freedom owed to my bison. To truly advocate for my bison and their presence on a ranch, I found it essential to understand their behavior on a deeper level. Bison are not merely livestock. They are adapted to thrive in open spaces that reflect their ancestral habits from the vast plains of North America. Their natural instincts dictate a way of life that is vastly different from the conventional expectations imposed by suburban living. Unlike domesticated animals that may respond well to strict confinement and routine, bison flourish when allowed the freedom to roam across ample land. They are highly social creatures who form tight-knit herds, Their interactions serve vital roles in their well-being and overall health. Whether grazing on grassland or engaging in playful antics with one another, their herd dynamics reflect a sense of community akin to what we value among humans. Observing this behavior firsthand has deepened my appreciation for their unique nature and reinforced my belief that they belong in an environment that honors their wild instincts. Bison also have specific dietary needs that can't be met by simply feeding them hay or grain. They thrive on a varied diet of grasses and forbs found in expansive pastures. Allowing them space to graze freely not only nourishes them, but encourages natural behaviors that keep them physically and psychologically healthy. When confined to smaller areas, their stress levels can escalate, leading to not just behavioral issues but also potential health problems. It's no surprise that bison can present challenges in terms of management. Their size and strength require robust fencing systems, designed specifically for large animals known for their impressive ability to traverse difficult terrain. While I've worked tirelessly to establish secure boundaries, the very nature of these creatures means they will seek out opportunities to explore beyond the ranch if given the chance. This instinctual drive conflicts sharply with HOA rules emphasizing stringent containment and manicured appearances. Additionally, bison are sensitive beings capable of experiencing emotions, much like humans. They form bonds with one another, showing signs of affection through grooming behaviors and protective tendencies over weaker members of the herd. It can be heartwarming to witness these interactions. However, it creates a delicate balance when managing their environment alongside neighborly expectations. Understanding their psychology is crucial when navigating the concerns raised by my local HOA. During my conversations with a compliance officer, I sensed he lacked an appreciation for these nuanced realities about bison behavior. His focus remained steadfast on compliance rather than grant compassion or understanding for my ranch's unique circumstances. I realized that educating others about these fascinating creatures could bridge the gap between unconventional ranch living and stringent HOA regulations. As I contemplated future discussions with the association, I resolved to advocate not only for my bison but also for colleagues who might face similar challenges. Creating awareness about how bison contribute positively to biodiversity and environmental health might shift perceptions within my community. Moreover, fostering an understanding of animal welfare would potentially encourage cooperation rather than conflict between ranchers and HOAs. In looking ahead, I knew I needed to engage with both my neighbors and the HOA board in discussions surrounding adaptive regulations that respect traditional ranching lifestyles while maintaining community standards. By illuminating the natural behaviors and needs of bison, I hope to lay the groundwork for coexistence, one where wildlife and human-made governance could meet without detrimental compromises. It was clear that this was about more than just compliance. It was about creating a harmonious living landscape where both people and animals could thrive together. The ongoing tension between my ranching lifestyle and the regulations set by the HOA illuminated the complex interplay between nature and human governance. Although HOAs are formed with the intent of fostering community standards and ensuring aesthetically pleasing environments, their rigid frameworks often struggle to accommodate the diverse and dynamic needs of rural living, particularly when wildlife is involved. As I navigated this conflict, it became clear that the HOA's regulations were largely shaped by urban ideals, where uniformity reigns supreme. In a suburban environment, where properties are closely packed and green spaces meticulously manicured, such guidelines make sense. However, applying these models to a ranch that thrives on open landscapes, diverse ecosystems, and the presence of animals like bison creates friction. The natural behaviors exhibited by these majestic creatures directly oppose the tidy aesthetics and strict boundaries favored by community boards. Understanding this disconnect prompted me to actively engage in conversations with my neighbors and even members of the HOA about the essence of rural life. Many residents simply did not consider how their expectations conflicted with the realities of wildlife management. They were accustomed to seeing pets or smaller livestock within fenced yards and could not see how bison, with their similar yet distinct needs, fit into our shared community landscape. I made it my mission to foster dialogue aimed at bridging this gap. Having an open line of communication provided valuable opportunities for education. I organized informal gatherings at my ranch where my neighbors could visit, observe the bison up close, and learn about their behaviors firsthand. Experiencing the gentle giants in their natural habitat allowed many to appreciate them beyond just being potential nuisances. Witnessing the bison graze peacefully or playfully interact stirred emotions of empathy in those who previously felt threatened by their presence. Additionally, I shared insights into how bison contribute positively to local ecosystems. Their grazing patterns help maintain grassland health while attracting a variety of other wildlife species that enrich biodiversity. Emphasizing these points illustrated that allowing bison to roam freely does not just serve their needs, but also benefits local flora and fauna, ultimately enhancing our community's ecological integrity. However, despite these efforts, regulatory challenges lingered on the horizon. I began exploring adaptive regulations, ones that could accommodate both bison grazing habits and community expectations for property maintenance without imposing severe penalties on ranchers. There had to be a way to harmonize recreational use of land with agricultural practices. Gardens could have orange-colored protective fencing that limits bison access without detracting from aesthetic values. In addressing concerns about safety or damage posed by free-roaming bison, I proposed regular monitoring programs that would ensure timely responses to any issues before they escalated into serious conflicts. Perhaps we could establish a cooperative agreement wherein ranchers would communicate with adjacent homeowners about expected grazing patterns and allow for flexibility in managing wildlife interactions. Ultimately, I recognize that successful coexistence didn't mean compromising one's values or way of life, but rather finding common ground rooted in understanding and respect for both nature and regulations. Through continuous dialogue and education efforts surrounding bison behavior and ecological importance, I aim to reshape perceptions while advocating for a balanced approach toward community living that honors every inhabitant, human and animal alike. The pathway forward may be challenging, but it is one worth pursuing for the sake of harmony between nature's rhythms and structured living environments. As I embarked on my journey to bridge the gap between my bison stewardship and HOA regulations, the reactions of my community varied widely. Some neighbors, who initially felt uneasy about the idea of sharing our space with bison, began to show curiosity as I invited them to learn more about my ranching practices. Their apprehension was understandable, given how these large animals have been painted in a negative light through gossip and hearsay. The informal gatherings I organized became a turning point. Neighbors who had previously viewed the bison as threats were now drawn to their majestic presence. Many families brought their children along, and their eyes lit up at the sight of the bison grazing peacefully or playing with one another. It was heartwarming to see not only the shift in perception, but also the blossoming of a sense of community that emphasized shared experiences in nature. These visits allowed me to address misconceptions and highlight how healthy bison populations can positively contribute to the environment. However, the reactions were not universally supportive. A few steadfast individuals remained resistant, particularly those who had voiced complaints to the HOA. They continued to express concerns regarding property values and potential liabilities associated with having large animals nearby. For them, bison represented an unpredictable element that could disrupt the meticulously curated image of our neighborhood. Such fears often overshadowed any ecological benefits or understanding of the ethical treatment of animals. To address these lingering concerns, I initiated a dialogue with those neighbors who were vocally opposed to bison in our community. I listened intently to their worries and shared articles and research highlighting how bison grazing can promote biodiversity while detailing effective management practices that could mitigate any potential risks. Engaging in these discussions with transparency and willingness to collaborate seemed crucial to altering perceptions. Additionally, I sought support from fellow ranchers and environmental advocates who understood the importance of integrating wildlife into our local ecosystems. This was not simply about defending my practices. It was about fostering a broader appreciation for various lifestyles coexisting within our community. Together, we began drafting a proposal suggesting adaptive regulatory measures that could both protect private properties and accommodate necessary wildlife interactions. One significant win came when a group of enthusiastic neighbors rallied around my cause after witnessing how the bison enriched our local landscape. They organized a community event at my ranch, allowing residents to experience firsthand how these animals lived without posing harm. We hosted workshops to discuss sustainable farming practices alongside fun activities for children, like hay rides or nature walks. The shift from apprehension to admiration among some residents was palpable. Despite the evolving dialogues within my community, several HOA board members remained staunch in their views, prioritizing compliance over understanding. It became clear that ongoing engagement would be essential in demonstrating how adopting flexible regulations could benefit everyone involved. As tensions persisted, I kept pushing for solutions aimed at unifying rather than dividing our community. The road ahead was long and fraught with differing opinions, yet there were glimmers of hope reflecting in those who were willing to rethink their positions. My commitment extended beyond defending my place at this ranch. It became about advocating for an inclusive approach where urban ideals harmonize with rural realities for the greater good of every resident, human and animal alike. Ultimately, I recognized that community reactions would evolve over time as discussions continued. My hope remained that our shared love for the land and respect for each other's choices could pave the way toward coexistence in which both people and wildlife could thrive side by side, creating a richer tapestry of life within our community. As tensions between my ranching lifestyle and the regulations imposed by the HOA continued, I realized that resolving these conflicts would require a multifaceted approach. It became clear that simply advocating for my bison was not enough. I needed to engage actively with both the HOA board and my neighbors to find common ground. In response to the concerns raised during the compliance officer's visit, I organized a meeting with the HOA board to discuss potential resolutions. I prepared an agenda that outlined not only the ecological benefits of having bison, but also proposed adaptive regulations that could satisfy both my needs as a rancher and the HOA's desire for community standards. I drafted a proposal that included practical solutions, such as designated grazing areas, enhanced fencing specifications, and regular communication updates to keep everyone informed about bison activities. The meeting was nerve-wracking, but I approached it with confidence. I began by expressing my appreciation for the board's commitment to maintaining our neighborhood's character while emphasizing that ranching practices could coexist with their guidelines. Sharing photographs of my bison in their natural habitat helped paint a vivid picture of their peaceful existence. I highlighted how these animals contributed to soil health and biodiversity, reinforcing the idea that they could actually enhance our community's environment rather than detract from it. Although some board members remained skeptical, others appeared intrigued by the possibility of flexible regulations. They began to ask questions about how we could implement safeguards while allowing for the natural behavior of bison. This dialogue marked a vital shift. It was no longer about me against them, but rather a collaborative effort to find solutions that would benefit all parties involved. In addition to engaging with the HOA, I recognized the importance of addressing the concerns of my neighbors directly. Many had expressed apprehension about property values and safety issues linked to having large animals nearby. So I arranged a series of informal neighborhood gatherings, potlucks where residents could come together, enjoy good food, and discuss their concerns in a relaxed setting. At these events, I encouraged open conversations about bison behavior and management practices. I invited a local wildlife expert to join us, providing additional credibility to my claims about the ecological benefits of bison grazing and how they could be managed responsibly. Residents appreciated this expert's insights, which lent weight to my arguments and helped dispel some myths surrounding bison. To further build trust within the community, I proposed establishing a community advisory committee focusing on wildlife management. This committee would include ranchers, homeowners, and HOA representatives working together to create guidelines that incorporate wildlife needs while ensuring community safety and aesthetics. The idea was well received, and several neighbors expressed interest in participating. Despite these positive developments, there were still those who remained staunchly opposed to any compromise involving bison. Their concerns were valid, but often rooted in fear of change rather than facts. To counteract this negativity, I made an effort to maintain transparency in all communications and updates about my ranching practices. As discussions progressed and resolutions were drafted, I noticed a gradual shift in attitudes among many residents who had initially been resistant. More neighbors began visiting my ranch, not just out of curiosity, but also out of a desire to support my efforts. It felt like we were forging connections based on mutual understanding rather than conflict. Through persistent dialogue and collaboration with both the HOA and my neighbors, I believed we were on the path toward creating an environment where ranching and residential living could coexist peacefully. My hope was that this journey would serve as a model for other communities grappling with similar challenges, demonstrating that with patience, education, and open-mindedness, harmony between nature and human governance could indeed be achieved. As I continued to navigate the complex landscape of ranching within an HOA framework, I recognized that my situation was not just a personal battle, but rather a reflection of broader implications for property owners who might find themselves similarly challenged. The conflict between local governance and individual rights is a recurring theme in communities that blend urban development with agricultural practices. My experiences shed light on the need for thoughtful regulations that accommodate diverse lifestyles while protecting property values. One of the primary concerns raised during meetings with both the HOA board and my neighbors pertained to property values. Many residents worried that allowing livestock like bison could lead to a decline in property desirability, primarily driven by fears of noise, safety hazards, and aesthetic disruption. Their apprehensions spoke to a larger dialogue about how communities perceive the balance between rural traditions and modern living standards. These fears, while not unfounded, often arise from misunderstanding rather than reality. It's vital for HOAs to recognize the evolving nature of community living, where agricultural practices can exist alongside suburban life without compromising safety or aesthetics. In grappling with these discussions, I realized that educating my neighbors could have far-reaching benefits. They needed to understand that ranching practices contribute not only to diverse landscapes, but also to environmental sustainability. For instance, grazing animals can naturally manage vegetation and promote healthy ecosystems by encouraging biodiversity. These discussions opened doors for meaningful conversations about land use in our community and highlighted the importance of integrating agriculture into our shared environment. Moreover, as local governance continues to emphasize stricter compliance measures on livestock ownership, it raises questions about fairness and equity among property owners. Those with more traditional residential setups often find themselves at odds with those engaged in agricultural or rural activities due to preconceived notions grounded in convenience rather than fact. Such misconceptions may foster unnecessary conflict when more accurate information would highlight how ranching can exactly align with community interests, encouraging ecological health while simultaneously supporting local economies. Faced with this broader challenge, I proposed forming a committee comprising ranchers, homeowners, ecological specialists, and HOA representatives tasked with reviewing existing regulations through collective input and analysis. This initiative aimed to address not just my situation, but all instances where agriculture conflicts with community requirements. Ultimately, we could shape policies that are adaptable yet respectful of the core values shared by residents across various living styles. Additionally, advocating for transparency within HOA contracts became increasingly relevant as other residents voiced frustrations about vague language regarding land use regulations. The clearer guidelines we drafted as a community would provide protection for both homeowners wanting to keep their properties pristine and ranchers needing operational freedom. By working together to establish expectations around livestock management while preserving public safety, community cohesion could flourish. Transitioning from a traditional standpoint to an inclusive one does not merely benefit ranchers. It promotes comprehension among all stakeholders about how adjacent agricultural practices can coexist positively within residential neighborhoods. Change often requires willingness on both sides. Those steadfastly set in their routine lifestyles become advocates for stewardship when presented with fair information and opportunities for engagement. By pursuing these discussions amid ongoing challenges posed by geography's merging urban settings with pastoral roots, we could forge new pathways, not just fostering peace in our own corners, but laying guiding principles applicable across various communities facing similar circumstances nationwide. It's an ongoing journey filled with lessons that go beyond simply defending my ranch. It has become integral in creating sustainable connections throughout diverse liveliness woven together harmoniously within our shared environment. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that the challenges I faced as a ranch owner navigating HOA regulations were not just about defending my way of life. They have become a profound exploration of community, nature, and the complexities of coexistence. The initial distress I felt during encounters with compliance officers and skeptical neighbors gradually transformed into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and advocacy. The experience highlighted how easily misconceptions can arise when different lifestyles intersect. My neighbors' concerns were genuine, stemming from fear of what they did not understand. It became increasingly apparent that education was the key to dispelling these fears and fostering a sense of community around our shared environment. By inviting others to witness the beauty and tranquility of my bison in their natural habitat, I opened doors to dialogue that transcended mere compliance issues. People began to see these animals not as intruders on their suburban landscape, but as integral parts of a broader ecological system that could enhance our community's vibrancy. Moreover, this journey underscored the importance of collaboration in addressing regulatory challenges. Forming alliances with fellow ranchers, environmental advocates, and even curious neighbors created a supportive network dedicated to finding adaptive solutions that respected both agricultural practices and community standards. My proposal for establishing a committee to review livestock regulations was born out of a desire to create an inclusive space where diverse perspectives could be heard and integrated into policymaking. As I continue to advocate for my bison, I learned valuable lessons about resilience and diplomacy. Engaging with skeptics required patience and empathy. It was crucial to acknowledge their concerns while also sharing factual information about the benefits of responsible ranching. The process was sometimes frustrating, but every conversation brought us closer to mutual understanding. Those who once viewed my lifestyle with suspicion began to appreciate the ecological value of sustainable agriculture. Through this experience, I also came to see my role as not just a rancher, but as a steward of both the land and my community. It is essential to recognize that our choices impact not only our immediate surroundings, but also future generations. By advocating for thoughtful land use policies that embrace both traditional ranching practices and modern residential needs, we can establish frameworks that promote harmony between nature and human habitation. Looking forward, I'm hopeful that the lessons learned will inspire other communities grappling with similar conflicts between urban living and rural traditions. My story illustrates how ongoing dialogue can lead to more nuanced understandings of what it means to share space, whether it is between people or between people and wildlife. In conclusion, the journey has taught me that coexistence is possible when we approach differences with openness and a willingness to educate one another. As I continue my work on the ranch, I aim not only to care for my bison, but also to foster a community ethos where diverse lifestyles are celebrated rather than feared. Together, we can cultivate a richer tapestry of life, one where respect for nature coexists alongside our aspirations for modern living, creating environments that nourish both human beings and the wildlife we cherish. My hope is that this ongoing dialogue will serve as a beacon for those seeking balance amid conflict, proving that collaboration can lead us all toward a more harmonious future together.